Thomas Carter had spent most of his life doing work that few people noticed. Every morning before the sun rose, he unlocked the doors of Maple Grove Elementary School, swept the hallways, cleaned classrooms, and fixed whatever was broken. His hands were rough from years of hard work, and his uniform was faded from countless washes, but he wore it with quiet pride. To him, honest work was never something to be ashamed of. After losing his wife to cancer 8 years earlier, Thomas lived alone in a small rented house on the edge of town. He had no children, no savings, and no family nearby. His salary as a janitor barely covered rent, electricity, and simple meals. To earn a little extra, he cleaned a nearby office building every evening before walking home. Although life was difficult, he refused to complain. He believed that kindness cost nothing, even when money was scarce. One chilly evening in late October, rain began falling as Thomas finished his second job. Pulling his old jacket tighter around himself, he hurried toward home through a quiet street lined with abandoned buildings. Suddenly, he heard what sounded like a child crying. He stopped. The sound came again. Following it carefully, Thomas reached the entrance of an old apartment building. Under a cracked staircase sat 3 young girls, soaked from the rain and shivering. The oldest, no more than 12, held 2 younger sisters close, trying to keep them warm with a thin blanket that offered little protection. Thomas slowly approached so they wouldn't be frightened. "Are you girls here alone?" he asked softly. The oldest girl nodded without looking up. "Our parents died a few months ago," she whispered. "We stayed with relatives for a while, but they said they couldn't keep us anymore." Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. He bought them hot soup and bread from a nearby cafe and watched as they ate quietly, grateful for every bite. Looking at their tired faces, Thomas knew he couldn't walk away. He had almost nothing to offer, but he also knew what loneliness felt like. Taking a deep breath, he said, "My house is small, and I'm not a rich man. But if you're willing, you can come home with me. No child should have to spend the night on the street." The 3 sisters looked at one another with tearful eyes, and for the first time in weeks, hope replaced fear. The first few months were the hardest Thomas had ever faced. Raising 3 growing girls on a janitor's salary was nothing like living alone. Every expense had to be carefully planned. Before buying groceries, he sat at the kitchen table with a small notebook, writing down every dollar he had earned and every bill that needed to be paid. There was never much left, but somehow he always found a way to make it enough. The girls soon settled into their new home and started attending the local public school. Thomas made sure they arrived every morning with clean clothes, packed lunches, and encouraging words. He believed that no child should feel different because of poverty. Although their uniforms were second-hand and their school bags had been repaired more than once, they were always neat and cared for. To cover the extra expenses, Thomas accepted additional evening cleaning jobs at nearby offices and a community center. Many nights, he returned home after 10 o'clock, exhausted from working nearly 16 hours. His back ached, his hands were cracked from cleaning chemicals, and some mornings he struggled to get out of bed. Yet whenever the girls greeted him with smiles, his tiredness seemed to disappear. The sisters slowly began to understand how much Thomas sacrificed for them. They noticed that he always claimed he wasn't hungry whenever there wasn't enough food for everyone. They saw him wearing the same old winter coat year after year, while making sure they each had warm jackets and proper shoes. They never heard him complain about his own hardships. Despite the financial struggles, Thomas refused to let the house become a place filled with worry. Every evening they shared dinner together, talked about school, and laughed over simple stories from their day. Before bedtime, he reminded them that education was the key to changing their future. "You may not control where life begins," he often said, "but you can choose where it leads." Those words stayed with the girls. They studied harder each year, determined to honor the man who had given them a second chance at life. Watching them grow into kind, responsible, and hard-working young women became Thomas's greatest source of happiness, proving that love and perseverance could build a family stronger than any hardship. By the time Thomas reached his late 60s, the three girls he had raised had built successful lives of their own. Emily was a lawyer, known for her determination. Grace had become a respected doctor, and Lily worked with vulnerable families as a social worker. Though they lived in different cities, they remained close to the man who had sacrificed everything for them. Every Sunday evening, they gathered at his small house for dinner, just as they had done when they were children. Thomas still worked as a janitor at the county courthouse. Many people wondered why he had not retired, but he simply smiled and said that honest work gave him purpose. The courthouse staff respected him because he was dependable, punctual, and trustworthy. For years, he had been given access to offices, records rooms, and court chambers without anyone questioning his integrity. One morning, however, everything changed. A sealed file containing critical evidence for a high-profile fraud case was reported missing from a secure office. The disappearance created immediate panic. Court officials launched an investigation, reviewing employee schedules and security logs. Unfortunately, Thomas's name appeared on the list of people who had been working near the office that morning. Investigators questioned him for hours. Thomas answered every question honestly and cooperated fully. He explained where he had cleaned, who he had spoken to, and the exact route he had taken through the building. Despite his cooperation, suspicion continued to grow. Some employees who had greeted him warmly for years suddenly avoided eye contact. Others whispered in hallways, convinced that financial hardship must have tempted the elderly janitor into stealing the evidence. The accusation hurt more than Thomas expected. For decades, he had lived by a simple principle. If a person had their honesty, they had something no amount of money could buy. Now that reputation was being questioned. When formal charges were announced, Thomas sat quietly outside the courtroom, staring at the floor. He felt frightened and alone, but he refused to let bitterness take hold of his heart. The truth has a way of finding daylight, he told himself. What Thomas didn't know was that the three daughters he had raised were already preparing to fight for the man who had once fought for them. Their lives had been shaped by his kindness, and none of them were about to let him stand alone. The courtroom was unusually quiet as Thomas stood before the judge. Dressed in his old, neatly pressed janitor's uniform, he looked tired but composed. The prosecutor outlined the accusations, arguing that Thomas had been the last employee seen near the office where the evidence had disappeared. Although there was no direct proof against him, suspicion alone had placed his lifelong reputation at risk. Just as the hearing was about to continue, the courtroom doors opened. Three women walked in with calm determination. Thomas turned around, surprised to see Emily, Grace, and Lily standing together. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. The frightened little girls he had once rescued had become confident professionals, and they had come for one reason: to stand beside the man who had never abandoned them. Emily stepped forward and informed the judge that she would represent Thomas. Grace presented medical records showing that Thomas's chronic back condition made it nearly impossible for him to perform the actions described by the prosecution. Meanwhile, Lily had spent the previous 2 days speaking with courthouse employees and reviewing security footage with investigators. Her persistence uncovered a crucial recording that had been overlooked. The video clearly showed another employee secretly removing the sealed file before placing it inside a personal bag. Faced with the evidence, the individual admitted to stealing the documents in exchange for money. Within minutes, all charges against Thomas were dismissed. The judge looked toward Thomas and said, "This court apologizes for the injustice you have suffered. Your honesty has been fully restored." Tears filled Thomas's eyes as the three sisters embraced him. He remembered the rainy evening when he had promised frightened children that they would never face life alone. 20 years later, they had kept that same promise to him. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Emily why all three of them had rushed to defend an elderly janitor. She smiled warmly before answering, people see a janitor. We see the man who gave us a home, an education, and a future. Everything we are today began with his kindness. As they walked away together, Thomas realized that the greatest reward for a life of sacrifice was not recognition or wealth. It was seeing love returned when it mattered most.